Our next World Series talk is going to be presented by Carl Ganter from the Frontlines of the World's Water Crisis. Carl co-founded and is the managing director of Circle of Blue, an independent journalism, science, data, and design organization that reports on global resource issues with a focus on the nexus of water, food, energy, and a changing climate. Under Carl's direction, Circle of Blue has completed extensive work in China, India, Mexico, South America, Africa, Asia, and even here in the United States. Today, Carl will go behind the headlines to show us the truth on the ground and introduce us to some of the real people and some of the most promising solutions that they're addressing at the front lines of the world's water crisis. Please welcome Carl Ganter.
I am a passenger. I stay under glass.
Great. Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here and with so many real heroes. Let's see if we can get our slides up here too. So I'm also a photographer. I started out at National Geographic and Time magazine, so a lot of these are my pictures. Not this one though. It kind of looks like a baseball on the screen, and so I thought of that. Of course, this is the World Series pitch. So I'm going to make my World Series pitch for water. And we just heard that we all have a stake, and we all have to share and shape people's opinions. Today I'm going to take you around the world, basically my frequent flyer miles, my carbon footprint I try to earn every mile. And so I am a journalist and photographer, and I believe that we're covering the most important story of our lifetimes. So how many people saw The Martian? Okay. Traveled with him. We've seems like we're always rescuing Matt Damon from somewhere. Mars was the latest, of course. But what was the first thing our stranded astronaut had to do? He had to make water, right? Wasn't so easy, but he had to make water. That's why we're looking at Mars. That's why we're looking at other planets. So I asked Jerry Lininger, Jerry's a real astronaut, about his perspective and what it was like to be circling the blue planet, making his drinking water from sweat and urine in space, while the blue planet is just right there. So this is what he said. I'll just read it quickly. A closed ecosystem, only so many sources of life-sustaining water, and all the creatures of Earth, just like the three of us circling it, all dependent on water. So who knew we had poets in space? But, of course, Houston, we have a problem. Our planet is thirsty. So for the last 5 years, water crises have topped the list of the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. I served on the forum's Global Agenda Council on Water Security. And the issue of water, the last 10 years, kept moving up on the list until it hit #1. So yes, we're relevant. We're also all about 70% water ourselves, so it's personal. But of course, it flows through and defines pretty much everything else we care about. So in this graphic here, climate change, national governance, food, biodiversity, urban resiliency, infrastructure, system shocks, all the other cheerful things that we talk about. And these numbers are just out from the UN with support from the World Bank a few weeks ago, launched at the World Water Forum in Brasilia. They're pretty stunning. 40% of the world's people are being affected by water scarcity. And 2 billion people, that's with a B, are compelled to drink unsafe water. These numbers are going up, they're not going down, unfortunately. And 4.5 billion don't have a safe place to go to the bathroom or to manage their waste. And this number is really stunning. And 700 million could be displaced by 2030 in search for water. Wow, that's amazing. And when you think about the impacts that Syria has had, driven significantly by drought and also groundwater stress, look at the other points of groundwater stress around the world, and we can start to peek into the future. But it's a future we don't have to have. So we all heard about Cape Town. We have a photographer and a reporter there now. We're always working somewhere. Trying to peel back the layers, and how did Cape Town avoid becoming the next or the first Day Zero city? They haven't branded it, Day Zero. So when we talk about communicating, that's actually pretty compelling. Day Zero set an actual date when Cape Town would run out of water. And when they'd set up water points, and when you did the numbers, there were 20,000 people per water point. Imagine that. Imagine standing in line and restricting your use of water down to something like 6 gallons a day. Try to do that. But then when we peek into the future, these are the other day zero candidates. You can see some pretty big ones here, and then you start to look at London, Mexico City, Tokyo even. These are infrastructure issues, they're water use issues, they're upstream water supply issues. And a big chunk of that too is, of course, the sanitation issue. We'll get to that in a minute. But so Jerry Lininger told me he was looking down on our little circle of blue here, and he could see dust storms starting over Inner Mongolia and blowing all the way to Beijing and then blowing on to Los Angeles. Yes, we're all connected. This is an astronaut's perspective. And so I can't go orbital like he can. Some people think I can, but what happens if you drop a string or a golf ball out of Jerry's spaceship? Where does it land? And so I'm a journalist and photographer. I like to go find out. We like to say we have a very secret process at Circle of Blue. People ask us how we got our stories, our data, and I say IWT. And they say, what's that? And I say, I was there. So I dropped in, quite literally, and this is what I saw. The first thing I saw in Shilinghat, Inner Mongolia, about a 2-hour flight from Beijing, some of the world's largest coal mines. Jerry could see these from space on a clear day. This is how China powers its economy. And then I went and knocked. I saw a house on the horizon and knocked. I'm Midwestern, so you show up a little bit before dinner, and they'll invite you to stay for tea and maybe a meal. And this is Wu Yun. She's the daughter of a shepherd, of an Inner Mongolian shepherd. Their well was dry. There's coal mines to their left, a coal mine to her right, and they have to drive now 15 kilometers to get water for their sheep. Imagine that. But then also Jerry would see these tunnels. How is China responding in multiple ways? These tunnels of moving water, ways to move water from the south to the north, to Beijing, and for mining. They need the coal, or they need the water for mining, and they need the water to cool their power plants. If you don't have water, you can't get to the coal. So there's also a secret story behind that. The fact that China doesn't have enough water to mine and process its coal, a story that we broke and that was cited by the team that supported President Obama and Xi and their climate agreement. The story here is that's driving China's renewables because they don't have the water to get to their coal. But another big story besides the water energy story, and that's a huge story when talking about risk and even stranded assets. Is there enough water to mine and process coal, enough water to cool the power plants? In India, the biggest story, the biggest water story is agriculture, as it is in many parts around the world, because about 70% of our water consumption is to grow food. But what happens when things aren't valued? What happens when water's free or when electricity is free? The farmers' lobby gets free electricity. They push for free electricity in Punjab. And so when you have something that's free, what do? You leave the lights on, right? So what they do is they leave their pumps on. They're just hardwired. They don't even have a switch to turn them off. 24/7, they are pumping their groundwater to irrigate when they don't need to irrigate. So, of course, it's mutual assured depletion. And then the story we're working on right now, we have a reporter in Delhi today. I did the early scouting on photography. I was out in the fields, and the farmers were irrigating, but there were only certain plants that would grow, and the water didn't look very good. And I said, where's your water coming from? And they took me upstream and up the canals, and we got in a car and drove further up. There's a cluster of paper mills north of Delhi. This is one of them. See a little bit of water on the right? The paper mill's water goes into the canals, and guess what? Since the farmers' wells are going dry, our friends in Punjab are draining their water table. Some parts of India, the water table's already gone, or it's gotten so deep they can't get to it. They're turning to industrial waste for irrigation. Imagine that. They're irrigating with heavy metal and arsenic and other laden water. Their soils. Imagine that. Again, mutual assured depletion. Here's what happens. So they're just looking to hold on until they can push their children onto a different life than farming. But here's another piece of it. So this is outside of Bangalore. The same story, wells are going dry, but I stumbled across this, and what's happening here? He's washing the beets. Okay, that's great. Except why is he washing the beets? Using groundwater at a station, a wholesaler is buying the beets there because their wells have gone dry and they're using raw sewage for irrigation. So the other part of this story is the farmers in certain parts of India won't even eat their own vegetables. They're shipping them to Delhi and to Bangalore. They won't eat their own produce. So imagine that in your supply chains. This is one of the biggest untold stories in India. We're working on it now and also putting together the data pieces. So I went during rice harvest to the Mekong, and we talk about coastal shifts, we talk about climate change, we talk about sea level rise and salinification. It's happening now. This could be the last rice harvest in certain areas in the delta of the Mekong. The paddies are turning salty. So the entrepreneurs, wow, we're going to grow shrimp. Awesome, global shrimp market. Except if you turn around, literally turn around from where I took that picture, the ocean's coming up. The ocean's coming up the Mekong. The Mekong flow is going down, the ocean's coming up. He's holding it back with basically plastic and mud. So I'm sure that's gone by now. So I do get to meet some inspiring people, but first, this is another piece. I put this slide in too. The agriculture piece is really interesting, the runoff piece. So globally, agriculture and fertilizer runoff is choking our water supplies with algae. Many of you have seen it in Lake Erie. This is what Lake Erie looks like when you send an intern underwater with a GoPro. That's what our interns, we call them our expendables. No, they always come home. They always come home. Our interns have done amazing work. We sent them to China, we sent them to India, and they always come back with great stories. The diminishing groundwater in the US, when you fly over the central US, you're looking at straws into the Ogallala Aquifer. So imagine every single crop circle, there is a straw into water that takes thousands of years to recharge. So we talk about value and water budgets. What are we going to spend our water budget on? Growing corn in the central US? These are really, really big, profound questions we have to ask. And of course, California keeps coming up. Of course, here, Ceres has a really strong program in California, Connect the Drops. California we'll see in the news consistently, both on the innovation side, but on the stress side. Now, we also talk about the promise of big data. So this is the Punjab Department of Irrigation. This is the server farm. I was very quiet when I walked in, not to awaken the servers. So, okay, great. I was supposed to be inspiring, right? Sorry about that. So here's our hashtag, oh my God. But it really is inspiring. We have a huge opportunity, and we're starting to do this now, all of us here, to realign our values, our heart and soul, our missions with the value. And we did this in an event we did at the Vatican. We called it From Values to Value. It was opened by Pope Francis. And we brought together, in a sense, the left brain and the right brain, the heart and soul with a spreadsheet. And then our perception and reality. And what happens if our perception's way over here and our reality's way over here? We have a problem. We have election anomalies, we'll call it. We have misalignment in policy and mission. When we bring together our perception, which we now can measure using sentiment analysis and big data, and marry that and come up with our reality piece, how does that align? And that's a partnership that we're working on with IBM Watson, as well as another company called Hexagon. We're finding some amazing analytics and things. That's really exciting. And this is what it looks like. It's our 3-tier. When you align perception, what do people believe, and align it with the reality, what's the trusted data, and then the context, what's actually happening on the ground. Why is he pumping water 24/7? Asking why. Sometimes if we listen to our kids, the best questions, of course, why? And just keep asking why, right? So this is the process that we think is going to be one of these transformative pieces to this puzzle. And it's not a simple technology, but it's not a difficult technology, and it's not necessarily a water technology. Aligning perception, reality, and context. So closing the loop. Here we are. We're seeing really exciting things happen. Singapore is turning their wastewater to drinking water. And they started out with the wrong branding. They call it From Toilet to Tap. So that's not a good way to start. But my point is that why do we even call it wastewater, right? We shouldn't call it wastewater. We also talk a lot about the social license to operate. Newmont Mine learned that when they came in with a big foot, and they'll admit it now, in Peru, that the neighbors and the farmers and everybody pushed back. And they put on hold, if not shut down permanently, a $5 billion mine, the Conga mine, because of local pushback. They did not get their social license to operate. It was very expensive. In Flint, Michigan, we saw that there are risks to inaction, and that local officials can actually go to jail for not necessarily malfeasance, but just misfeasance, not paying attention. A risk of inaction, not listening to the weak signals. Sorry, this young man was holding his child here. I knocked on their door. It happened to be her birthday. and his eyes burned right through me because he doesn't know if she's permanently damaged because of lead poisoning. Imagine that. Leadership, this is very cool. In Mongolia, we turned the chairs around, quite literally. There were holes in the carpets because the chairs kept facing forward. Let's turn them around so that the farmers and the parliamentarians can actually face each other and talk. That was pretty interesting. Systemic responses, water, food, energy, climate, are SDGs. If we haven't memorized them all and gotten our SDG pin, we should. SDG 6, goal 6, of course, is water, but what's goal 17? Partnerships and collaboration, right? I mentioned the Vatican. I think this is one of our biggest stories and biggest opportunities here, is our value of water. How do we value it? How do we price it? And then our values and bringing those together. That's a big story with unlikely suspects. Pope Francis, maybe we can get him to do a water encyclical. I'm not kidding. It's news, it's now. I'm a journalist. This is the front lines. People care about headlines, people care about moments, and they care about relevancy. Quite literally, connect the drops. Let's not let moments pass. Let's seize those moments and not wait for an 18-month white paper process, but let's put our people out there talking about the relevancy to our different audiences as it's happening. Because on the ground are people like Wu Yun, and fast forward, I've been back to visit again. Unfortunately, the mines are getting closer. Wu Yun took me out into the grasslands that should be green, and now they're sandy swales. Fast forward again, the coal processing facility now is one of the largest in the world. There are 6 mines now, even with China's move to renewables. And they don't dare to drink whatever groundwater that they can get. That's her translation there. But they're real people. So what did they do? They asked me when we went out, they took me out for 3 days into the grasslands, and literally I lived on WeChat as my translator, and they pulled out these beautiful clothes from their backpack and handed me their cell phone and asked me to take their picture. They were getting married. So I did their engagement portraits. So they're real people on the front lines here. And they're really sweet. And we're still in touch with WeChat. But this is where they live. And how serious are we? This is the big question, I think, for all of us that Mary asked us yesterday. How serious are we? Are we willing to look in the mirror and say, okay, we're going to take this a step further, far beyond than what our expectations. And scale up, what a great theme. But it's also scale up and not a second to lose. And we have, I call it a profound moment of relevancy, not only for ourselves, but our constituents, our entire employee systems. How do we educate them so they educate their children and their markets and their markets and their networks? Incremental's not an option. We have to go big. Think beyond our comfort level. And we have this thing called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and we were talking about this in Davos this year, about all the technologies and the sciences, and I said, don't forget behavioral science, and don't forget social science, because we have to get people to change, not only just with our technologies. So yesterday we heard the quote from Desmond Tutu, Prisoner of Hope. I thought that was really profound. How many people were here for that? Okay. For me, though, I think Prisoner of Hope means we're alone. So a great friend of mine is a designer and has managed some of the world's largest brands. And what drives his mission when he's looking at a brand, an advertising campaign, logo, mission, whatever, he says, we have to make hope visible. And I think that's a good message for all of us. We have to make hope visible because these girls here, these 3 girls here are Marasis. They live near the border the India border in Pakistan. And they took me along with them to fetch water, which they do 4 or 5 times a day in 100-degree plus heat. And this is at sunrise, and I was just taken by the dignity of the people that I get to meet who are on these front lines every day, surviving with minimal sanitation or having to fight for every drop of water. So that's our mission. That's my pitch to you. That's my World Series pitch to you, is let's make hope visible, and let's use every moment and every tool possible to do that.